My daughter? I almost kept driving. I was 62 years old, sitting in the parking lot of a gas station off Route 9 inches, rural Tennessee, and my phone was ringing with a number I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I had learned, over the years, that unexpected phone calls rarely carried good news. But something made me answer, some instinct I cannot explain, even now. I picked up. The voice on the other end was young, a woman, maybe early 30s. She said she was calling from Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville. She asked if I was the father of a woman named Claire. I said yes before she even finished the sentence. She told me Claire had been in a car accident 2 days ago. I want to stop here and tell you something about the years that came before that phone call, because without them, you cannot understand what those words meant to me. You cannot understand why I had to sit in that parking lot for almost 10 minutes before I could put the car in drive. Claire was my daughter. She was 31 years old. And I had not spoken to her in 4 years. My ex-wife and I divorced when Claire was 26. It was not a clean divorce. There is no such thing as a clean divorce, when one person has spent years quietly deciding to leave, while the other person had no idea. I found out she had been seeing someone else the way you find out things you were never supposed to know by accident, all at once, in a way that leaves you no time to prepare. I came home early from a work trip. I will not go further than that. We had been married 31 years. Claire was our only child. What happened in the months after the separation is something I have gone over many times in my own head, trying to understand where things went wrong between my daughter and me. My ex-wife and I handled the divorce the way two people handle something they are both ashamed of badly, with lawyers, with things said that could not be taken back. My ex-wife is good at a particular kind of storytelling. She always was. She can take a version of events and present it so cleanly, so reasonably, that the version she is presenting starts to feel like the only version that ever existed. By the time she was done telling Claire her version of our marriage and our divorce, I had become a man I did not recognize. Claire stopped returning my calls about 8 months after her mother and I separated. First, the calls went unanswered. Then the texts went unread. I drove to the apartment she lived in at the time, the one she shared with her boyfriend in Knoxville, and she answered the door and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger. Something worse than anger. Exhaustion. Like she had already had this conversation 100 times in her head and she was tired of it. She said she needed space. I said I understood. I did not understand. I drove back to the house that felt too large for one person, and I sat in the kitchen and I tried to figure out what a man does when he loses his daughter without knowing exactly how it happened. I did not have a good answer. I went back to work. I coached youth baseball on weekends, the same thing I had done since Claire was a little girl, because it was the only place I knew how to be exactly what I was supposed to be. I kept my phone charged. I kept the ringer on. 4 years passed. And now a stranger was calling me from a hospital in Nashville, telling me Claire had been in a car accident, and she was alive, but she had injuries to her left kidney, and the damage was severe. I was on I-40 before I finished the call. I drove the 2.5 hours to Nashville the way you drive when your mind is somewhere else entirely. I do not remember most of it. I remember pulling into the hospital parking garage and sitting in the car for a moment with my hands still on the wheel, trying to decide what I was walking into. 4 years of silence. 4 years of a daughter who did not want to know me. I did not know if she had been told I was coming. I did not know if she wanted me there. The nurse who called me had only said she was contacting next of kin, and my name was apparently still on file somewhere as an emergency contact. I wondered if Claire even knew that. I wondered if she had ever thought to take my name off. I went inside. The woman at the front desk directed me to the surgical ICU on the 4th floor. When I stepped off the elevator, the first person I saw was my ex-wife. She was sitting in one of the chairs near the nurse's station. She looked up when the elevator opened. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Then she stood up and she walked toward me, and she said, very quietly, that I should not be here. I told her that a nurse had called me. She said she did not know why they would do that. I said it did not matter why. I was here. I wanted to see my daughter. My ex-wife is a small woman. She has never needed size to fill a room. She looked at me with the particular expression she had perfected over 31 years of marriage, the one that communicated very clearly that she found me both disappointing and predictable, and she said that Claire was sleeping and that she did not want visitors and that I was not going to walk down that hallway and upset her. I stood there for a moment. Then I asked to speak to Claire's doctor. I want to be clear about something. I am not a man who makes scenes. I never have been. I spent 31 years of marriage being the one who kept things calm, kept things steady, kept things from boiling over. If you ask my ex-wife, she will probably tell you that is the problem, that I never fought hard enough for anything. Maybe she is right. But in that moment, standing in the 4th-floor hallway of a hospital in Nashville, I decided I was done keeping things calm. The doctor was a tall man, mid-40s, who came out of Claire's room carrying a tablet and speaking to a resident. He introduced himself and took me to a small consultation area just off the main corridor. He explained Claire's condition in the way that doctors explain things clearly, with a kind of careful compassion that tells you before the words do that what you are about to hear is serious. Claire's left kidney had been so severely damaged in the accident that it had been removed. Her right kidney was functioning, but it had existing damage from a condition she had apparently been managing for several years, a condition I had not known about because we had not spoken in 4 years. The doctor said that the right kidney was currently compensating, but that it was not a long-term solution. At some point, possibly within the next 1 to 3 years, she would likely need a transplant. I asked if there was something I could do now. He said that a living donor transplant was an option, but not an immediate one. The priority right now was her recovery from the accident. But he said that if I wanted, I could be preliminarily tested for compatibility. It was a simple blood draw. It would tell them quickly whether I was even a possible candidate. I said yes before he finished explaining what the test involved. He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded and called a nurse over. I did not see Claire that first day. My ex-wife made sure of that. She sat outside Claire's room like a guard rotation she had assigned to herself. And every time I came near, she found a way to redirect the conversation, to create some small obstacle the doctor needs to check on her. She just fell asleep. The nurses said no visitors for another hour. I let it happen. I told myself I was being patient. I told myself I was giving Claire space the way she had asked me to 4 years ago. Mostly I sat in a chair at the end of the hallway and waited. On the second morning I came back to the hospital early. My ex-wife was not there yet. A different nurse was at the station. I asked if Claire was awake. The nurse checked the board and said she had been awake since around 6. I walked down the hall. I knocked on the open door. She was lying with her head turned toward the window, the morning light coming in sideways across the bed. She was thinner than I remembered. Her hair was longer. She turned her head when she heard the knock, and for a moment she just looked at me the same way she had looked at me in the doorway of her apartment 4 years ago. I said hello. She said hello. I asked if I could come in. She was quiet for a long time, then she said yes. I pulled a chair up to the side of the bed. I did not try to hug her. I did not try to explain the 4 years, or apologize for the divorce, or say any of the things I had been rehearsing in my head since the parking lot off Route 9. I just sat down. I asked her how she was feeling. She said she had been better. I said she had always been better than me at understatement. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile. Something near it. We talked for about 40 minutes that morning, not about anything important. Not about her mother, or the divorce, or the years of silence. She told me about the accident, a driver who ran a red light, a totaled sedan, the shock of waking up in the ICU. I told her about the youth baseball team, about how one of the kids I'd coached 6 years ago had just been drafted to a minor league team in Virginia. She said she remembered me talking about that kid when he was 11 years old, how I used to come home from Saturday practices talking about how the boy had a natural arm. I had not realized she remembered that. When visiting hours ended that morning, I walked back to the elevator. My ex-wife was stepping off as I was stepping on. We stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked at me. I looked at her. She asked how Claire seemed. I said she seemed tired but strong. same as always. My ex-wife did not respond to that. She walked past me down the hall. I spent the next 3 days at that hospital. Not always in Claire's room. She needed rest. She needed quiet. She needed time to recover from something that had nothing to do with me. But I was there. I brought coffee in the mornings. I sat in the family waiting area and read and answered emails and watched the news on the mounted television with the sound off. I was there when the pain management team came by in the afternoons. I was there in the evenings when the floor got quieter and the hallway lights dimmed. I was just there. On the 4th day, a nurse I had not spoken to before stopped me in the corridor near the elevator. She introduced herself as one of the transplant coordinators attached to Claire's case. She said she wanted to follow up on the blood compatibility test I had submitted on the first day. I said, of course. I had been wondering when I would hear back. She looked down at her tablet for a moment. Then she looked back up at me. She said the results had come back and that the transplant team needed to speak with me. I asked if something was wrong. She said nothing was wrong exactly. She said the results were just... She paused. She said they were unexpected, and the team wanted to review them with me in person. I followed her to a small conference room on the 3rd floor. There was a doctor there I had not met before, a woman with short gray hair who introduced herself as the director of the transplant program. There was also a younger man, one of the residents who had been with Claire's primary physician on the first day. They both had the particular expression that medical professionals get when they are about to tell you something they have checked and rechecked because they cannot quite believe it themselves. The director set a folder on the table. She said that my preliminary compatibility results had come back showing a very high degree of HLA antigen matching with Claire. She said they had run the test twice to confirm. She said that the level of compatibility they were seeing was, in her experience, significantly higher than what they would typically expect between a parent and child. I said I did not understand what she was telling me. She said she understood. She said this was unusual. She said that the degree of matching they were seeing was more consistent with what they would expect between identical siblings or, in some cases, between a parent and child when both shared a very rare and specific set of genetic markers. I sat with that for a moment. I said, "So you are saying I am a match?" She said yes. She said I was, in fact, an exceptional match. I asked if that was a good thing. She said for Claire, it was potentially a very good thing. What I did not know, what I had no way of knowing when I sat down in that conference room, was that on the other side of the hospital, in the room where my ex-wife had been spending her afternoons, a different kind of conversation was already underway. Claire had asked her mother, while I was in that conference room, what she knew about why I had submitted for compatibility testing. My ex-wife had apparently said something dismissive that it was probably nothing, that I was probably just doing it to make myself look good, that I should not have been involved in her medical care to begin with. Claire had asked her to stop. My ex-wife had said she was just being honest. Claire had asked her to leave. I did not know any of this when I came back upstairs. I came back to the 4th floor and found Claire's room empty of visitors, and Claire herself lying quietly with her eyes on the ceiling, the way she used to lie on her bedroom floor when she was a teenager and needed to think through something difficult. I knocked. She said, "Come in." I sat down. She said she heard the transplant team had spoken with me. I said yes. She asked what they said. I told her. I told her the same way the director had told me plainly. Without embellishment, just the information. That I was a strong match, that it was not guaranteed, there were more tests to be done, but that the early results were promising. She was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said, "You came here." I said yes. She said, "They called you and you actually came." I said yes. She looked at me for a long moment. She said she was not sure she would have come. If the situation had been reversed, if 4 years of silence had been on the other side, I said that was not something she needed to think about. She said she did need to think about it. She said she had been thinking about very little else since she woke up in this hospital. I want to tell you what I said next, because I think it was one of the few genuinely honest things I said in that entire week, or maybe in the years before it. I said, I came because you are my daughter. I said it is not more complicated than that. I said whatever happened between your mother and me, and whatever happened between you and me, none of it changed what you are to me. You are my daughter. I drove here, that is all. She did not say anything for a while. Then she said she had believed things about me for 4 years that she was starting to think might not be entirely true. I said I was not interested in relitigating any of it. She said she was. She said she wanted to know what I remembered about the divorce. Not the legal version, not the version with the lawyers. What I remembered. So I told her. I told her the version I had never told her because she had never asked, or because I had thought she was not ready, or because, honestly, I had been afraid of what it would mean if she chose not to believe me. I told her about coming home early. I told her what I found. I told her that I had not fought her mother the way I should have, not because I did not love Claire, but because I was 60 years old and exhausted, and I believed, foolishly, that if I just gave everyone space, eventually the truth would sort itself out on its own. The truth does not sort itself out on its own. I have since learned this. Claire was quiet through all of it. She did not interrupt. She did not push back. When I finished, she said, "She told me you had been the one." I said, "I know." She said she believed her. I said, "I know." She said she was sorry. I said, "I know that too." What came after that was not a reconciliation in the way that word usually implies, immediate, complete tears and forgiveness all at once. We are a family made of 2 quiet, stubborn people, and things between us do not move that fast. But something shifted in that room. Something that had been locked tight for 4 years moved, just slightly. And I felt the movement the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, not the storm itself, just the knowledge that something real is coming. The next rounds of compatibility testing happened over the following 6 weeks. I drove back to Nashville 3 times, each time sitting in waiting rooms and answering questions from various members of the Transplant team, each time leaving with new paperwork and new instructions. The match held up. Every round of testing confirmed what the preliminary blood draw had shown, that I was, in the language of the Transplant team, an unusually strong candidate to be Claire's living kidney donor. The surgery was scheduled for late spring. I want to tell you something about those months before the surgery. Claire and I started talking again. Not every day, not easily, not without the occasional silence that stretched too long or the conversation that veered toward territory we were not yet ready to cover. But we talked. She called me one Sunday afternoon from her apartment. She had moved back to Knoxville just to tell me she had started watching baseball again, and she was genuinely confused by the new pitch clock rules. I spent 45 minutes explaining the pitch clock. It was the best 45 minutes I had spent in 4 years. Her mother did not take well to what was happening between us. I say this without anger. I genuinely believe my ex-wife did what she did over the years out of her own pain, her own particular way of protecting herself, her own version of a story she needed to be true in order to survive what happened. I am not interested in her as a villain. I have spent enough of my life sorting people into roles they were never complicated enough to actually fill. But she called Claire several times in those months, and based on what Claire told me, she was not supportive of the transplant plan. She said I was doing it for the wrong reasons. She said it was manipulation. She said that Claire needed to think carefully about what it would mean to have something of mine inside her, carrying forward, a physical obligation she would owe for the rest of her life. Claire told me about this on one of our phone calls. I asked how she responded. Claire said she told her mother that she had thought carefully about it, and her answer was yes. The surgery took 6 hours. I was under general anesthesia for most of it, which means I cannot tell you what it felt like in any real sense. I can tell you what the recovery room looked like when I woke up: white ceiling, fluorescent light, a nurse checking my vitals and asking me to tell her my name. I can tell you that my first thought was to ask how Claire was doing. I can tell you that the nurse told me Claire was out of surgery and in recovery, and that everything had gone well. I can tell you that I lay there for a while in that recovery room, listening to the sound of equipment and the muffled voices in the corridor outside, feeling something I did not immediately have a name for. It took me a few minutes to identify it. It was peace. I do not mean peace in some large spiritual sense. I do not mean I had resolved everything or forgiven everyone or arrived at some final understanding of my life and what it had meant. I just mean that, lying there in that recovery room, I was not bracing for anything. I was not waiting for a phone call that might not come. I was not calculating the distance between where I was and where I wanted to be. I was just there, and the thing I'd been able to do was done, and it was enough. Claire was moved out of the ICU 3 days after the surgery. I was discharged the day before she was moved, and I spent my first day home walking slowly around the house, careful with the incision site, careful with the effort of stairs and bending and reaching. My neighbor came over with a casserole. Quote, one of the boys from the baseball team, 19 years old now and just finishing his first year of community college, came by and mowed my lawn without being asked. Claire called me the evening she was moved to the regular ward. She said, I said, like someone removed part of me. She said, me too. I said, though mine feels more literal. She laughed. She actually laughed. And I sat in my kitchen, 62 years old. And I thought about the drive I had almost not taken that day on Route 9 when a stranger's number showed up on my phone and I almost let it go to voicemail. There is a version of my life in which I did not answer. I think about that version sometimes. The man who kept driving, who told himself it was probably nothing, who had learned over 4 years of silence to protect himself from the possibility of hope. That man exists somewhere. I understand him completely. I cannot blame him for anything. But I answered, there is not a clear ending to what I am telling you. Life does not work that way, and I am too old to pretend it does. Claire and I talk regularly now. She came to visit me in the fall, and we spent a weekend driving around the area where I grew up, stopping at things that meant something to me when I was her age, the field where I played high school ball, the diner where my own father used to take me for breakfast after Sunday church, the small cemetery where my parents are buried side by side under a red oak that has gotten very large over the years. She took a photograph of the tree. She said she wanted to remember it. I asked her what she meant. She said she just wanted to remember that things last. I am not a perfect father. I was not a perfect husband. I made the particular mistake that quiet, patient people often make, which is believing that patience is the same as wisdom, that waiting is the same as understanding. I let 4 years go by on the grounds that I was giving someone space, when really I was protecting myself from the feeling of being turned away again. That is not grace. That is just fear wearing a reasonable face. But I drove to Nashville, and I sat in a waiting room, and I answered questions, and I lay down on a surgical table and told them to take what they needed. I am not interested in credit for that. I want to be clear about that. I did not do it to prove anything to my ex-wife, or to settle any score, or to manufacture a debt that Claire would have to acknowledge for the rest of her life. I did it because she is my daughter, and a father is not a biological fact. A father is a choice you make, over and over, in small ways and large ones, in parking lots and hospital corridors and recovery rooms and phone calls on Sunday afternoons about pitch clock rules. I made that choice. That is the only part of this story I am certain I got right. Last month, Claire came to one of my Saturday baseball practices. She sat in the bleachers with a coffee and her phone, and she watched me work with the kids for 2 hours. Afterward, she helped me fold up the equipment bags, the way she used to when she was young enough that helping felt like an adventure rather than a chore. One of the kids, a 9-year-old who has been struggling with his batting grip all season, asked her if she was my daughter. She looked at me. I looked at her. She turned back to the kid and said yes. She said yes, she was. I kept folding the equipment bags. I did not say anything. I did not need to. Some things you have been waiting years to hear, and when you finally hear them, the best thing you can do is just let them land. I am a father. I have always been a father. And if I had to do it again, the drive, the surgery, the recovery room, the 62-year-old man lying in a hospital bed asking how his daughter is, I would do it faster. I will see you in the next one.